Shalom. Give all praise and glory to Yahweh, Shema Shabbat, Shema Kakadash. And double honor to the elders and apostles of great most on the truth. And peace, blessings, and salutations to the hopeful elect.
India just told the US to basically off, and they've agreed on things with Russia that the US said was never going to happen. In fact, despite the US saying that India will no longer buy Russian oil, Russia said, quote, "We are now ready for uninterrupted shipments of fuel to India." But you need to know, in their meetings today, they agreed on things much more than that, and they're going to become far closer than ever before. India said that the deals they agreed with Russia on would, quote, "take the India-Russia economic..."
What was it called? You're going to Elam, which Persia is a part of Elam. But yeah, like it says, Ezekiel 30 and 5 to Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. And Gomer and all his bands, the house of Tolum of the north quarters. And again, that gone to Turkey. And all his bands, and many people with thee. And just letting you know that this is a beta. It's a beta. Nah, man. That's why the things look a little bit different.
Economic partnership to new heights. But as well as that, the US expected that India was going to try and pressure Russia into ending their war on Ukraine. However, despite the US saying that, not once in their meetings did India actually try and push Russia to end the war on Ukraine. India simply said, quote, "We support every effort towards peace, and we are on the side of peace." But as well as that, according to reports, India is also going to be buying Russia's best military equipment. And this came at the same time there was reports that India was expected to buy Russia's Su-57 fighter jets, Russia's best jets. And so despite the US and the West saying that India is going to be moving further away from Russia, this summit has completely gone against that, and now they're going to be closer than they ever have been before, it seems. But India has a reason for doing this. They're not doing this...
As it says here, Ezekiel 30 and 7, be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company. Then the company going into friends or allies that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. So yeah, Russia's going to be protecting these people that, well, protecting the, well, allies, if you want to say that, yeah, protecting the allies.
It seems. But India has a reason for doing this. They're not doing this for nothing. India is currently on the verge of war with Pakistan, and if they don't do something, then Pakistan is going to be more powerful. The reason I say that is that only today, Pakistan announced they want to create their own version of NATO, specifically against India. In fact, Pakistan wants to come together with China and Bangladesh, and India is actually worried about this. Even today, Pakistan's foreign minister said, quote, "Our country's needs and priorities cannot and should not be held hostage by India's rigidity." But you need to know, this isn't just an idea. This comes at the very same time that Bangladesh is just as annoyed at India as Pakistan is. And there's a reason for that. Specifically, India is refusing to extradite the former Bangladeshi Prime Minister, who is currently in India. She was sentenced to death in Bangladesh, and they want her back to face that punishment. So at the moment, Bangladesh is more than happy to start working with Pakistan against India. China, though, as you'd expect, who only really wants the best for China, isn't so happy about working against India, but they're still happy to work with Pakistan and Bangladesh. China has recently said, quote, "Our country's cooperation with Pakistan and Bangladesh is not directed at any third party." But still today, Pakistan has stood up and showed their interest in wanting to come together against India. It shows the tensions between India are not...
And even then, Isaiah 9:5, it says, "For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood, so hand-to-hand combat. But this shall be with burning and fuel of fire, including hypersonic missiles. They're going to be used, especially over there in the east."
Between India are not great at the minute. To be fair, it's not like India isn't trying to do the exact same thing at the same time. They're starting to work with Afghanistan, Pakistan's enemy, who Pakistan is currently fighting with. I mean, just today, Afghanistan launched a huge attack on Pakistan on the border, and possibly dozens of people have been killed. And Pakistan responded. They said, quote, "We are committed to ensuring our territorial integrity," meaning they're going to make sure this doesn't happen again.
This is the most addictive game in 2025. No one can build a perfect shelter. In the game, you are thrown into a harsh post-apocalyptic
integrity, meaning they're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. But you do need to know that Afghanistan...
As it says here, 616:1 says, "Woe be unto thee, Babylon, being America and Asia, and woe be unto thee, Egypt and Syria." It says, "Gird yourselves with cloths of sackcloth hair, and bewail your children, and be sorry, for your destruction is at hand." So there you go, man. the Lord's planning all this, man. The Lord's planning it all.
Territorial integrity, meaning they're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. But you do need to know that Afghanistan actually said something completely different to what Pakistan said. Afghanistan completely blamed the attack on Pakistan. They said, quote, "Unfortunately, this evening, Pakistan once again launched attacks on the border." You do need to know, though, that this isn't just a one-off thing. Cross-border attacks like this have been happening loads over the last few months between Afghanistan and Pakistan. However, almost every time this has happened, the other side has accused the other of starting the attack. It seems today, though, that Afghanistan has crossed a red line with Pakistan, as just a few weeks ago Pakistan said that if anything like this happens again, then Pakistan will declare war on Afghanistan. And literally only a month or so ago, Pakistan carried out airstrikes onto Afghanistan's capital to try and scare Afghanistan off from doing something like this again, but they have now. Now, it is worth knowing that this single attack that happened last night is over. The fighting has stopped. Both sides confirmed that, but the overall fighting is still ongoing. But unlike usual, this attack that took place last night, no casualties were reported. Both sides were quite vague. They simply blamed the attack on each other and didn't say the details of what happened. All we know at the moment is that soldiers on the border started shooting at each other. We don't know the outcome or who actually started it. But as I just said a moment ago, China is kind of hesitant about working against India. And that's simply because China does appear to be more interested in themselves rather than other people's problems. In fact, that was emphasized by something that happened today. The French President Macron visited France and he's met with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And France said, quote, "Dialogue between China and France is even more essential than ever." Although something worth knowing, France actually used this meeting with China as an opportunity to try and get China to condemn Russia. Specifically, Macron said, quote, "I hope China at the very least will join our call for a ceasefire on Russian strikes." But China, as you'd expect, didn't fall for it. Again, because all they're really interested in is their own benefits. They don't want to annoy Russia. Xi Jinping said, quote, "China supports all efforts that work towards peace." Something else though, China did use this as an opportunity to announce $100 million in aid to Gaza. And this comes not too long after France...
And even then, the missiles are going to bring peace, as it says. Isaiah 2:4, it says, "And he shall judge among the nations, So then again, this is going to into the Lord. As it says Isaiah 2 and 3 says that many people shall go and say, "Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, or the house of the Lord, to the house of God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." Yeah, being the real Israelites, man. Being the Negroes, Latinos, Hispanics, and Native Americans, including the Mexicans and Single Indians. And you also got Israelite foreigners that look like the other nations. But their bloodline goes back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, making them one of the sons of God, or one of the daughters of God. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. So there you go, man. All this war is for the, it's actually for the what's it called, man? It's actually for peace. The war is going to bring peace.
After France officially recognised a Palestinian state, which is probably why China announced it today. And I will get to that in a bit, but one of the really important things about this meeting you need to know about is that France and China talked about really increasing their trade together. For a long time, Europe has been talking about trying to move away from China and become less dependent on them, but France today has done something that kind of goes against that, and Xi Jinping said, quote, "China's door will open even wider than it already is." As well as meeting Xi Jinping though, Macron did also use this as an opportunity to do some sightseeing around China and go to some really famous cities and things. Although, whilst on the topic of France trying to condemn Russia, they did something today which could start a war with Russia. Today, France shot down 5 drones that were spying on their submarines, and if they turn out to be Russian drones, well, it could cause a war. This morning, France said, quote, "French Navy troops in charge of protecting the base opened fire on the drones." And you need to know, these drones were not just flying over any military base. These drones were flying over France's nuclear submarines, armed with France's nuclear missiles. And this comes at the same time that similar things are happening all over Europe, around European military bases. And a lot of those times, those drones are either exposed as being Russian drones or accused of being Russian drones by NATO. And because of that, NATO recently ordered that if anything like this happens again in the future, then NATO needs to shoot down the drones to make sure that they can't spy on NATO, which is exactly what France has done today. France hasn't really spoken on this much other than just saying they shot down the drones. They didn't say where the drones were from, they didn't actually confirm if they were shot down or not, they just said their troops opened fire. But looping it back to China a second, China announced a $100 million aid package to Gaza whilst Macron was visiting China. You need to know about this though, this is quite a big deal. Xi Jinping said, quote, "China aims to support the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip." And Gaza responded. The Palestinian president said, quote, "This generous donation shows China's unwavering stance in favour of truth and justice." Although it's important to know that China said this is not only for humanitarian aid like food and water. China said this money is also to, quote, "promote rapid recovery and reconstruction programs in the Gaza Strip." And that's something really important to focus on, because this would suggest that China is not only interested in helping the people of Gaza, but they might also be interested in helping rebuild Gaza and aid with the reconstruction of it, as they say. You may know, but yes, the US has recently been talking about doing the same thing, rebuilding Gaza.
It doesn't matter, the land's going to be destroyed. Jeremiah 49:20. It says, "Therefore hear the counsel of the Lord they have taken against Edom, and his purposes they have purposed against the inhabitants of Timon. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely shall make their habitations desolate with them." So yeah, It's going to be destroyed, man, by hypersonic missiles.
Talking about doing the same thing, rebuilding Gaza. They said it was going to cost billions of dollars though, and I'll be honest, it doesn't actually seem like that's going to happen. And so it's possible China sees this as an opportunity for them to come in and them to help rebuild Gaza. However, as I said, it seems more than just a coincidence that Xi Jinping announced this whilst Macron was visiting China. And that's because recently France recognised a Palestinian state, which really annoyed Israel. And so it's likely this is China trying to say that they actually agree with Europe on a lot more than Europe thinks. It is very clear though that Europe is moving away from Israel. Today, at least 4 countries have said they're going to boycott Eurovision next year in response to Israel being allowed to compete. And these countries which have pulled out of Eurovision are not just small countries that nobody's heard of, they're actually quite important. They're all countries which have previously won. They're Ireland, the Netherlands, they're Spain and Slovenia. But you do need to know, these countries haven't pulled out of Eurovision just because they don't like Israel, it's because of something else. Obviously, a few years ago, Russia was banned from competing in Eurovision due to their invasion of Ukraine. And these 4 countries are not just mad at Israel and mad at Eurovision for Israel.
That makes no sense. They're pulled out because of the war. But the Israelis can mash up the Palestinians, and they can continue to partake in those worldly things. No, but crazy, man. This is the Lord showing us our oppressors, man. The Israelis, man. The oppressors.
Being allowed to compete, but they're annoyed at the double standard that Russia isn't allowed to compete, but Israel is. You should know, these are all countries that have been very vocal in their support of Palestine and Gaza. Spain was one of the first countries in Europe after the war kicked off to stand in support of Gaza. Since then, Spain ended all aid, trade, even relations with Israel, and they recently recognised a Palestinian state as well. They were one of the first in Europe to do it. So it's not a huge surprise, to be fair, that a lot of countries in Europe are starting to boycott Eurovision because Eurovision has allowed Israel to compete next year. But there is one more really important thing which I want to touch on, and that's that a civil war almost started in Iraq last night because the Prime Minister seemingly tried to sell out to the US. In fact, yesterday, the Iraqi Prime Minister designated both Hezbollah and the Houthis as terrorists. But what's important is he did that just a day after the US met with him. Specifically, the US told him in those meetings that if he doesn't stop the pro-Iran groups in Iraq, then Israel will bomb Iraq. And so it seemed more than just a coincidence that the Iraqi Prime Minister did this just a day after the US warned him of that. And the people of Iraq weren't stupid, the politicians realised that too, and within a single night, the Prime Minister was almost overthrown over it, simply because they feared he had sold out to the US and given in to the US's demands. And so the Iraqi Prime Minister was faced with 2 options, either double down or retract the terrorist designations of them. And he chose the second option. This morning, the Iraqi Prime Minister said it was, quote, an error. In other words, he said it was an accident, and Hezbollah and the Houthis were not meant to be included in the designation. Some people are taking his word for it and saying it was an accident. Other people are saying it's not just a coincidence that he designated them as terrorists a day after the US told him to. I think he realised if he did that, then he wouldn't be in power for very long. Although this was just a tiny thing that happened in the meeting, the US told the Iraqi Prime Minister something else. And what the US told him genuinely might start a war in the Middle East now. To be honest, that one thing was more important than everything I've told you in this entire video. So yes, it's important to know all of this, but if you don't know that, which could cause World War III, you've wasted your time watching this video. So click here to make sure you know about that, because it's really quite a big deal at the minute.
But yeah, simple as that. This war will bring peace. But yeah, I hope it was edifying. I want to give praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, Shema, Shabbat, Shema, Kakadosh.
If you live in England and you're between 50...
And then Shalom.